everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for this second extension session, which forms part of Renew's Sustainable House Day program for 2024. My name is Anna Cumming, and tonight I am very pleased to be hosting Acing the Basics, which will shine a light on the very important basic elements of sustainable design, including things such as orientation, insulation, and airflow. We have people tuned in from all over the country today from a wide variety of unceded lands. I'm speaking from the traditional land of the Dja Dja Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation in central Victoria. I acknowledge that the traditional owners have nurtured country since time immemorial through their spiritual, material and economic connections to the land and waters. I pay my respect to elders past and present and extend this respect to all First Nations people the world over. Here at Renew, we're very grateful for the support of our sponsors, and in particular those that make Sustainable House Day and this series possible. Thank you to this year's sponsors, the New South Wales Architects Registration Board, Bank Australia, Witchcliffe Eco Village, the ACT Government Suburban Land Agency, Lighthouse Architecture and Science, Envirotecture and Cargo Cycles, as well as our local council partners, Marybeck and Banyule City Councils, Wingecarribee Shire Council, and the cities of Yarra and Coburn. Tonight, we'll tackle design from square one, using the expertise of our wonderful panellists to dig into the fundamentals of how to locate and orientate your home to make the most of the warmth of the sun, how to retain that warmth when it's wanted, how to shade and cool your home in summer when that heat's not wanted so much, and so on. The design basics that are important for ensuring a high-performing, comfortable home without the need for lots of active heating and cooling. For those that haven't met me before, I'm a writer and an editor, and I've held a variety of communications roles here at Renew since 2010. In 2019, I took over as managing editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes, Australia's premier magazine dedicated to sustainable house design, so I've been in this space for a fair while now. I love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about all of this, about the design strategies, the materials and the systems available to achieve truly sustainable, delightful homes. This is our second session in this series of 8 that's designed to give you a deeper understanding of sustainable design principles, whether you're embarking on your own build, renovation or retrofit, or maybe even looking for your next rental home. If you haven't already, there's still time to purchase an extension session pass, which gives you access to all of the sessions. We'll pop the link in the chat now so you can access the rest of this great series. I'm joined tonight by 3 special people, experts in their fields, who will all be approaching this topic from different perspectives. Now, I think the intro slide may have still listed Elizabeth Wheeler. Unfortunately, she is not able to join us after all. Instead, we have Rebecca Boyle, who's joining the Renew community as a panellist for the first time. Rebecca's a thermal performance assessor and a residential scorecard home energy assessor. She began her career as a pharmacist before climate change concerns precipitated a change in career in 2006. She's worked with hundreds of households, schools, aged care facilities and small businesses to identify cost-effective ways of reducing energy and water costs. We're very happy to have you with us tonight, Rebecca. Welcome. We also have Ian. Now, Ian, I meant to check the pronunciation of your surname, and I did not do that before we got started. I am so sorry. So maybe when you get on camera, you can tell us your surname and how to pronounce it properly. Ian is a registered builder and a Green Smart professional with over 15 years of experience in construction, and he's dedicated to environmentally responsible design. He crafts beautiful, durable houses using carefully considered materials and values collaboration between designers and clients for the best outcomes. Based on Victoria's Surf Coast, Ian's own rammed earth house reflects his ethos perfectly and ticks all the boxes for sustainable design. So great to have you here, Ian, bringing the builder's perspective.
Thanks, Anna.
And how do you pronounce your surname?
Wybenga, yeah.
Wybenga. Ian Wybenga, everybody. And last but by no means least, please welcome Jenny Edwards. Jenny's the Director and Lead Scientist at Lighthouse Architecture and Science, an interdisciplinary business focused on smaller, smarter, sustainable homes. She is a regular writer for Renew and Sanctuary. Thank you, Jenny. And yeah, she's one of our go-to experts in many areas, particularly many areas of sustainable design and particularly renovation. And of course, walks the walk herself. She's just in the process now of downsizing from the family-sized home she and her partner built to something smaller and more appropriate for their empty nester stage. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Jenny.
Lovely to be here. Thanks.
During our discussion tonight, I'm going to be putting viewers' questions to our panel. So you can put your questions into the Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of your screen as we go. Please keep them out of the chat. You're welcome to chat. But for questions that you would like us to address or to try to address, please put them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Please be mindful, though, that questions that are really specific or detailed may not be appropriate for this panel event setting. And we always have more questions than we have time for anyway. Okay, let's get started. What is it that makes a home cool in summer and warm in winter, no matter where you are in the country, that doesn't cost the earth to run and is a joy to live in? Easy, right? Jenny, let's start with you, please. Let's get your thoughts on the basics. When you were planning your own family home, the one that you've just sold, featured for the Sanctuary back in issue 50 and open many times for Sustainable House Day over the years, what were the key elements that were unconditional for you and integral to the home's sustainability and performance?
Number one, orientation, absolutely. And it was actually the trickiest thing in the instance with the new home that we were building, because we were on a long, skinny block with north to the street. So we only had, it's 13.5 metres wide and 30 metres long, and it was that street frontage that faced due north. So a lot of other builders had dismissed these particular blocks as too hard. We can't achieve 6 stars on these, let alone anything more. But of course, with good design, you can. So we had to design cleverly to make the most of that northern orientation and to put the main living area at the front of the house and then design the house so it had little pop-outs to grab northern sun as you progress through the house. And as Anna said, you can check out that floor plan online. It's a really 150 square metre home. But so orientation, absolutely number one. And once we nailed that and got the layout right, it was about those simple things. Let's insulate it well, not to crazy levels, not really above the NCC standard, but make sure we do it well. And then think about that airflow, so we get cross ventilation in summer, but also make sure it's nice and airtight, so that in winter we're not losing heat. So those three really basic things, and we'll progress to others later.
So orientation, insulation, airtightness,
and cross ventilation.
And cross ventilation.
Yeah.
Very good. Great. Rebecca, if you're planning a house and incorporating as many of these principles as you can, how do you know how energy efficient it's actually going to be and how it will perform? What are the measures or metrics that are useful for people to know about? And how do the different climate zones across Australia affect the design decisions they need to make?
Yes, well, of course, there are always basic fundamentals that you should implement when building or designing a place. But unless you can measure or get some sort of metric of how well it's going to perform, it's kind of up in the air until you live in it to know how it's going to be to the comfort and costs. So I imagine most people are familiar with the NATHERS
energy rating
system. That's a government developed system. It basically is a way of, when it's used in a regulatory way, it's a home software modelling tool that does a very detailed measure of how much your house is going to cost to heat and to cool throughout the year. It's and it gives you a score out of 10, showing how the thermal performance of the house is going to be. And that's a very good indicator of how sustainable your house is. The actual inputs that go into that modelling are very detailed. They're detailed on the structure of the house, and all sorts of elements go into it, such as floor construction, the wall constructions, the windows, the types of windows, the sizes, the orientations, insulation, etc., etc. And then it actually applies the local, wherever you live in Australia, it applies the local weather to that model, and hour by hour it works out how much energy it's going to take to keep that each room in that house comfortable, and then it adds it all up and gives you a total energy load, which is then converted to a star rating. So it's very, very detailed. It's not perfect, but it is a very good starting point. And so that is used for science purposes, for building, for the building code and for building surveys.
And so that's the what you're talking about is the star rating system that people would be pretty familiar with.
That's right.
I think,
yeah.
Rebecca. Yeah, just
Yes,
the background behind, or what goes in the back in the behind the scenes into creating a 6.5 star or a 7 star or 7.5 or an 8 star design.
That's right. And
Yeah.
the minimum required has been 6 stars, but people may not realise that gradually over Australia, and as of Victoria and Queensland started out on a new minimum standard of 7 stars. So that's being driven by the
The
government.
ACT did it well before.
Oh, ACT, sorry. Queensland, yeah, so the government is driving sustainability or energy efficiency in houses. Another exciting development with NatHERS is that they've also extended it from just looking at the building fabric to all the main fixed appliances. And now we're getting a really useful, an even more useful tool in that when you do your NatHERS rating, if you include the whole of the house, we're getting a score which will tell you, which will allow you to actually get to net zero by adjusting the amount of solar panels. So that the higher performing the house, the thermal fabric, and the more efficient the appliances that you're putting in, you're now getting a score to see how close you are to net zero and how many solar panels. So that's new and existing new buildings and alterations and extensions. There is another scheme which is becoming more familiar for existing houses, because most of us do live in existing houses and are looking at improving the poor performance or the cold, uncomfortable conditions or overheating conditions in existing houses. And that's another rating tool, which includes some thermal modelling of the performance of the house, as well as appliances. And that's called the residential scorecard. And that's also a very useful way of seeing how your house performs now, and then trying different iterations to see how much better you're going to do by applying different
particular changes.
Here.
So just,
sorry.
I was going to say, just to clarify about the climate zones, Rebecca. So with the NatHERS star rating system, that means that if you live in a colder climate, in order to achieve the same star rating for your house design as a warmer climate, you'll need more insulation, for example, or the requirements for the design and the build are going to be different depending on your climate zone in order to achieve the same star rating, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, of course, we live across a very diverse range of climates.
Of course.
And
so people really need to check out the requirements for in their own area, obviously, and it's not a one size fits all across the country for that kind of
absolutely
thing.
not. And I guess as far as questions come up, it might be useful for people to actually the state where they're coming from to help understand.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Because obviously climate makes a very big difference to what you might consider for optimizing a design in a build.
And you're in Tasmania, so you'd be familiar with high levels of insulation and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, I'm definitely a cold climate specialist.
Yeah. Thanks, Rebecca. So moving on to you, Ian, as a registered Green Smart builder in this space, what elements do you think are the most important for homeowners to integrate from the outset of a new build or a renovation project?
Yeah, I think Jenny got it spot on. She's taken the cake, saying that it's size and orientation, of course. For us, when it gets to us, windows are probably the main one that we try and focus on with people. It's something that we really like to put a heap of weight into because it's complex, expensive, and really ineffective to change out windows later on in a project, i.e., down the track. So getting windows right takes heaps of time and effort, and it means talking to the suppliers, talking to the energy raters, working with the designer. There's so many options out there with windows. We think it's a really big one to get right. And as has been mentioned, it's so important to get that team around you early in the design phase so you can really nail out the best outcome.
who do you consider important? Like what professionals do you consider are important to get on board early, and to maximize your chances of a really good, smooth process and a good result?
Yeah, so you really want to be seeing the designer, the builder, and the energy rater collaborating early. And then from that, you're going to be engaging, subcontractors to put their 2 bob in and try and find the best pathway forward. And every site's going to be different, and everyone's going to have different wants and needs and priorities. And it's just trying to find that sweet spot.
What's the advantage of getting those professionals on your team early?
I think Renew's probably covering it in some other seminars, but it's getting those areas costed and knowing that what you're throwing in, if you're just throwing in everything that you want and then it gets to the end and you can't afford it, then you've wasted money and you've wasted time, and you're going to have to pay money to either scale back on the house, or you're going to have to lose out on some features. And both options aren't a great outcome, in my opinion.
And I know anecdotally, a lot of the time it's the sustainability features that get cut. So if you're really keen to keep those in the picture, then it's probably even more important than usual to,
absolutely.
And I should say that, sorry, just following on and to support that, that's the whole reason the Lighthouse model has been successful, is because it's architecture and the science. So I'm a thermal performance assessor as well for 15 years or so, and we've got others on our team. So the science and the architecture work together. And we also used to be a construction company, so we had that construction input as well. So as Ian knows well, understanding the bang for buck of those thermal performance measures is also so important. So yes, build that team, balance all those things, and as you said, different priorities, different sites, but you do need input from all 3 of those professionals.
Absolutely. So taking a step back here for a second, what we've been talking about, orientation and insulation and air tightness and so forth. Basically, we're talking about ensuring great passive solar design, with the aim always of ensuring that your house is going to be comfortable internal environment with minimal energy use. So, which means minimal heating and cooling, active heating and cooling. That's the basics, right? So, can you give us a quick rundown on what that's all about? What elements go into that? There's more than just what we've talked about already.
Yeah, well, I guess classic passive solar design has relied on thermal mass as well. So that's one thing people will have heard of. And I want to stress, don't panic, particularly if people live in existing houses that don't have thermal mass. You can still massively improve your existing home. You don't have to have thermal mass to make your home a sustainable home. But if you are starting on a new house, then integrating some thermal mass can work really well. And again, this is where you get the input from your energy assessor and your builder to balance the cost and the thermal benefits. But thermal mass is those things like concrete in your floor or masonry internal walls, those heavy mass objects that absorb heat during the day when the sun shines them on those shines through on those sunny winter days, absorbs that heat, and then it slowly releases into the home overnight. In summer, the sun doesn't strike it because you've designed it so well that the sun won't be hitting that thermal mass, but the thermal mass can absorb any excess heat in your home. So it's a useful strategy, but not critical for a sustainable home. Yeah.
I think all the strategies, all the elements that we're going to be talking about tonight, they all play a part, but there's so many different combinations that you can make work, depending on your site and depending on your budget, depending on your other factors about whether you want to use concrete or not use concrete, whether you're building on a slope or, there's so many different ways of combining these elements to produce a great effect that there's not one recipe.
No.
Yeah. So thank you for making that point, Jenny. What else? There's orientation. We've been talking about how important orientation is. The reason orientation is important is because of that sun, of the northern sun in winter, which you want to have coming into your house, but also you want to be blocking the unwanted sun. So in most climates in Australia, you don't particularly want too many western facing windows because that's quite low afternoon sun. That's hard to manage. I believe. Am I right?
Absolutely.
And want to scale back on your south facing too, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because in most of our climates, they don't really get much useful sun.
No, so you've really got to think really hard about designing your eaves appropriately to for that, which is the easy strategy to the north, because an eave can protect northern windows from the high angle sun. But as Anna was mentioning, it's the east and the west that are the problems, because the sun's
Yep.
at a much lower angle. So that's where you have to use different strategies, vertical shading, whether it's with vertical retractable blinds or deciduous plantings, and thinking about keeping those window sizes smaller. So you'll hear energy assessors
Yeah.
and even builders these days talk about the glazing to floor area ratio. And that's where your
Yeah.
energy assessor can really help you for your climate to work out what is the optimal window size for
Yeah.
each room. It's really
and it really is about the optimum size, isn't it? Because if your windows are too big, then they're going to let out too much heat in winter, and probably too much sun in summer too.
Yep.
If they're too small, they won't let enough warmth in. You know, it's a real balancing act, and that's where the science comes in.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and it is a problem in Australia that we do like very glassy houses.
I call it
Traditionally, we like
lazy architecture. It's
Lazy
lazy
architecture,
with
yeah.
a wall of glass. Yeah.
we like shiny things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, in the tropics, shading is a completely different issue, whereas we're not just concentrating on shading windows, we need to shade whole walls.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an extension. And even if you're further north of the Tropic of Capricorn, we're also getting that sun back onto the southern side of the house. So
Absolutely.
being aware, it really does come back to being really aware and interrogating your thermal performance assessor,
Mm.
to make sure that they're considering, and make sure that you understand what these issues are for your climate zone, because they are very unique. With NATER's modelling, or thermal performance modelling, there are actually 69 different climate zones around Australia. So each one of those climate zones is basically a unique set of weather conditions and sun orientation, sun angles and wind and weather. So there are a lot of different climates to
and
consider.
microclimates too. You know, for example, the one that springs to mind is higher elevations in Queensland can
That's right.
be pretty cold and need to have well insulated houses, even though you're in Queensland. So you'd think,
and
always
even
hot.
simple things like in Canberra, we get really sunny mornings. So easterly glazing is actually can be quite good. But if you go to somewhere like Bathurst, which is not that far away, it's sort of a similar climate. They have incredibly foggy mornings, and eastern glazing's no good to you at all. So again, this is another reason to work with local experts as well. That local knowledge about climate combined with the energy assessors' expertise and the builders' expertise can really be very helpful.
Interesting, Jenny. Is fog picked up in NATERS at all?
Well, as I said that, I think no, I'm not sure that it will.
Indirectly, in that cloud cover is partly.
Yeah, it would be.
The extent of cloud cover, I think, is partly considered in the sun hours and.
But I should check exactly how Bathurst compares to Canberra. But I know it does. The modelling is different. I mean, it's a different climate zone, but otherwise quite similar. But yeah.
Rebecca, you can, I'm sure, talk more to this, but windows are the weakest part of a house typically, thermally.
Yeah.
And
even really high performing ones.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking that, even really, really high expensive windows are still going to be the weakest part in just a typical 90mm frame wall?
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so I was working on a house today which has exploring the cost benefit of going for very high performing windows. So windows are considered, the thermal efficiency of windows is considered, they're rated, how well they keep heat in is measured by something called a U value. If you're not familiar with a U value, it's exactly the opposite to an R value. It's the inverse of the insulation. So the lower the U value, the more heat the window will keep in. So we were looking at windows with a U value of 1 today in this house to try and push up. The client is prepared to spend money. So that U value, if you turn that into an R value, the total R value, or the insulation of the window, is about 1 as well, because it's 1 divided by 1. If you compare that to a wall, which has an insulated wall might have an R value of 3, it doesn't matter how good your window is, you're never
it's not
going
going
to
to be
get
that good.
the
Although
best
you can,
insulation from a window
you
is
can,
going
you
to get
can,
a
you can
R1.
get close if you've got thick curtains with pelmets and
That's right.
insulated
Yeah.
blinds and so forth. We are,
But-
I'll pull you out of the rabbit hole, guys, about windows, because one of the other extension sessions coming up on the 9th of May is all about windows. So
Okay, we won't go there.
it is a very, it's a really important topic, as Ian said. There's a lot to know. It's very technical, and it's important to get it right. But tune in on the 9th and hear all about it.
Can I just make one comment in terms
Okay,
of
Jenny, go.
retrofitting houses? I'm not going to go into details, but in terms of retrofitting houses, people don't panic and don't think double glazing is the first thing you should do when you're retrofitting existing houses, because it's actually further down the list. Draft seal, insulate, get off gas first before you think about windows.
And that's mostly because it's so relatively expensive to
and you can do stuff with window dressings and external shading before you replace the glazing unit.
Absolutely. So we've talked about orientation, we've touched on thermal mass, which absorbs heat when you want it and then radiates it at night. Basically, the role of thermal mass is to regulate the internal temperature and make the most of the free solar energy available from the sun. Shading is the sort of flip side of that, managing the flip side of letting solar gain in is blocking it when you don't want it. Then there's what role does insulation and airtightness play in this whole equation?
A really important one. When you get that lovely passive gain in winter, you want that heat and goes into your slab, but again, you don't need the thermal mass necessarily. Let's assume you're in a renovated house with a suspended timber floor. You've got this heat in your home, you want it to stay there, and that's where your insulation stops that conductive heat loss. So insulation, heat rises. So in terms of keeping the heat in your home, you want to start high. Your priority is your ceiling insulation, your wall insulation, and then your floor insulation. So if you've just moved into an older home, check out the ceiling insulation as your first priority. But hand in hand with that, I never let people think about insulation without thinking about draft sealing, because as well as the conductive heat losses, convective heat losses can pull it all apart. You can have a beautifully insulated house, but if it leaks like a sieve because it's got physical holes in the structure, then you're not going to be comfortable. So do those two things, insulation and draft sealing, can make you so much more comfortable. And the draft sealing is something you can do in a rental as well. Some of the basics,
it's
which
pretty
is
low cost. Pretty low intervention. Most landlords would be pretty happy for you to be doing some draft sealing. I would say. And there's also a point to be made about moving air because of the evaporative cooling effect on human skin. If you're in a room that is still and does not have drafts and therefore doesn't have moving air, the actual ambient air temperature of that room can be lower and you're still comfortable. Whereas if you need the ambient temperature to be higher to be comfortable in a room where there are drafts, just because of the moving air situation. On top of the fact that you're losing heat out the gaps. Ian,
do you follow Kui architecture as well, Anna?
Sorry?
Do you follow Kui architecture as well? She was talking about it today.
Oh, really?
I taught her well, Ian.
Yeah, Jenny
exactly
told her
what Anna said, but yeah, that's good.
Can I just make another
coincidence, but I definitely I'm on the same bandwagon for sure.
Can I just step back? Can I just step back to insulation again? Another point.
Yeah, go for it, Rebecca.
Probably with all things to do with sustainability, there's no actually, it's worth knowing that when you're building a house, that nobody's actually coming along and checking that energy efficient, the sustainability measures are.
Except Jenny.
Jenny. In most cases, the building surveyors not coming in and checking that insulation's installed well, or that insulation's put in at all. So it's really worth, if you are building, it is worth taking that responsibility upon yourself and learning about what good well-installed insulation looks like, insisting on inspecting the insulation yourself before plasterboard's put up, and just make sure that it's done well, because there's lots of little details like you don't want the insulation compressed, you don't want little gaps left between the insulation and the batts, You don't want it left out under windows. You don't want it, quite often joins in walls aren't insulated. And once the plaster's on, you're never going to know unless you take a thermal camera. So a really important tip is to go and inspect, or get somebody who knows to inspect the insulation before it's covered up.
I was just gonna ask Ian about that same.
Yeah, it's probably better for
same
Ian.
topic.
I'm sure Ian knows
Rebecca,
exactly.
yeah, because so Ian, you're a builder. I know that. So listeners may not know that the NATA's star rating is a rating of the design. It's not a rating of the building. And so the missing link there, or the link that is at risk of being missed, is building to that design. And obviously builders like you, Ian, are all over that, but there are many that aren't. And so what should people do about that? In order to make sure that they get the house that they have had designed and that they have optimized the design
really tricky.
of.
and there's probably not much more you can do other than inspect it yourself and understand that it needs to be continuous. And just popped into my head while Rebecca was talking about it, but gaps in insulation, I know Rebecca might know the stats, but a small gap in insulation of 5% over the entire house reduces the effectiveness by.
It's actually 5% in R5. I can show you the physics, but 5% gaps in R5 reduces it to R2.5.
Wow,
oh my goodness!
Yeah,
that's huge.
Crazy.
And thinking about retrofitting to older buildings and the downlight issue, I saw someone just pop that into the chat as well, where old downlights couldn't be insulated over. That's not the case anymore, but you still occasionally see some people pulling out insulation behind power points or behind downlights because they're still concerned about that. I mean, check with the electrician and make sure that you're not doing something wrong. But if you're retrofitting, you want to make sure that you're not covering up old halogens or old LEDs that can't be covered up. As far as inspecting insulation on a building site, I mean, I've seen plenty of photos of houses with just the bags and everything up in the roof. Hasn't even been laid out. That's a really easy thing to just pop your head in, find out the plaster date, ask to make that inspection.
You can even put it into your contract if you feel really strongly about it.
Yeah, love that idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
Make it a what do you call it? Like a KPI for the builder.
Yeah, mandatory inspection for the owner. Pull your own energy rating out and have a look at what they've spec'd in there, because it will be detailed what's in what wall and whether there's any internal walls that have been allowed for or under slab insulation. I suppose that's a whole nother topic of how you might need to be making that inspection, because that can be even more difficult than a pre-plaster inspection.
Make sure you're getting what's detailed in your energy assessment.
Sure.
Yeah. And I guess taking a step back even from that, Ian, pick a good builder in the first place who's on board with you with what you want trying to achieve, because then you'll understand. It'll make your life a whole lot easier.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Even if your builder isn't particularly pushing back, it's certainly a lot easier to have a builder who's actually positively, actively on board with the whole thing.
I just posted a link to an old article I wrote for, I can't remember whether it was Renewal Sanctuary, Anna, the one about how to choose a builder.
Oh, and that was a while back now, but I think the points would all be the same.
Totally. Yeah. And there are lots of builders who are interested in this stuff. So while there are, some to, basically the ones who are interested will be willing and keen to have these conversations with you. They won't shy away from them.
Exactly.
So,
they won't try and talk you out of it.
No, it's your biggest investment. It's worth doing some research and interviewing the builders, because someone like Ian is going to interview incredibly well and fill you with confidence. And there are other builders out there like Ian. So
and then if you're confident, then you may not need to do the inspection yourself. You might be happy to let your builder handle that.
Yeah.
There's also sustainable. There's also Sustainable Builders Alliance, which just launched last year, which has come out of Builders Declare, and so they're pumping out resources left, right, and centre. But they're also just a really great. You can go and have a look at the list of builders that have signed up for that, and that's a pretty good indication.
Yeah, terrific.
I mentioned in the chat that they've got a checklist that you can do as well.
It
might have been
it's a great one.
One eye on the chat at the same time, but That sounds pretty handy.
I suspect that might be
Yeah.
Jeremy Spencer's checklist.
Yeah, I think it's
Of
Jeremy's. Well,
footprints.
Jeremy's is
Yep.
great. I
Yeah,
recommend
Jeremy's
everyone
is
look at
very
Jeremy Spencer's
comprehensive.
checklist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what other elements are important for a sustainable build? Still talking about the real high level basics here. I want to throw in overall build size into the
So
conversation.
do I. I want to show you the badge that I wear every day.
I can't quite read it. What does it say?
It says less
Less.
less house.
Build less house. Yeah.
Yeah, with good design, a small footprint home can deliver you so much functionality, and it costs less to build, less to run, less to maintain. It's more climate resilient. So, another reason to find a good designer who. So, number one, if you're serious about sustainability, is size. In terms of operational energy, and in terms of embodied energy. And same goes for renovations. Don't fall into the trap of thinking my house is so terrible, the only way to make it great is to do a huge extension. Really focus on retrofitting what you've got and doing a small extension if you really need to, and just reconfigure what you've got.
Absolutely.
The size.
And maybe putting some numbers to that, if you think of
yes,
what the average house, what the average build price per square metre is now, Ian, but I imagine many houses are up around $10,000 a square metre. Imagine if you reduce the size by 4 square meters. That's $40,000.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily directly translate, because every house still has 2 bathrooms and 1 kitchen, and they're the really expensive things. But you're right, absolutely.
Okay, but you can offset
totally.
If you're building a large house.
Yeah,
I've seen some local architects threw some numbers to it recently down on the Surf Coast, and it was like somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 a square metre and up, depending on everything else. But there's the economy of scale. I think what you're talking to there, Jenny. Like you're reducing the total area, but you've still got kitchens and bathrooms, the expensive parts to add in there.
Yeah, but an interesting comparison. Sorry,
I'll just caveat house size, which is like, don't go so small that you have to build it bigger in 2, 3, 5 years, or for someone else to move into it. Get it right, obviously. But.
Totally.
Which comes down to flexible design as well.
Yeah.
Thinking about what your needs are going to be in the next 5, 10, 20. It's expensive to sell and buy new houses.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Money. So if you can make what you've got, plan for the future.
Multi-purpose and flexibility are the two things that I love to talk about. Multi-purpose spaces, so that you don't need a different room for every single purpose. You can have 1 or 2 rooms that fulfill 7 or 8 different purposes.
Yeah.
And also flexibility, which is exactly what Rebecca's just talking about. Think about changing of uses and changing of family needs over time, household needs over time.
Most of our smaller family home designs, which 150 to 170 square meters, are actually designed to then function as 2 homes. As the kids leave the nest, you can split it into 2. So you can
with their kids. And
that's right. And when I built my place, out of interest, mine was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home. Most of the project homes around with 4 beds and 2 bathrooms were between 200 and 240 square meters. Their overall cost was the same as my home, but at 6 stars. So there's no more functional space. All you got was extra floor area, extra space to heat and cool.
And your house was how many stars, Jenny? Just remind us.
8.2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your bills would have been tiny.
Tiny. So per square meter.
Very comfortable.
Yeah, half. So 8-star to 6-star is a 50% reduction. So people don't realise that the scale is not linear either. So it's a big leap up. So aim higher with the stars and smaller with the footprint, and the impact is huge.
And that the star ratings related to square meters of floor area.
Yes.
House.
That's true. So it is actually slightly harder to get a higher star rating with a small house than with a bigger one. But that does not mean it's not worth having a very good shot.
It's a bit there is a readjustment factor there. Larger houses are.
And that's something to do with the ratio of wall area to volume, isn't it? Or surface area to volume. Anyway, we're getting a bit technical down another rabbit hole. But I just want to throw into the conversation that I am just about to send our next issue of Sanctuary to the printer, which has a small projects theme. And it's been great to put it together. It's all the house profiles are focusing on small footprint, small scope, small budget, small interventions that make a huge difference, that kind of thing. Plus, I've got an article on small home design, so basically covering everything we've just talked about. Why do it and how to do it, tips and tricks, and also talking about secondary dwellings and so forth. So yeah, it's great. I recommend that people subscribe today, and then you'll get one in the mail in about 3 weeks' time.
Be a cracker.
Yeah, it's a topic close to my heart because as with everybody here, obviously as well, I'm a bit shocked that the average new build in Australia size is hovering around 250 square meters. Still, that's the average.
The average number of occupants
is dropping.
Dropping.
Yes. 250 square meters is my absolute maximum rule of thumb for inclusion in sanctuary. And so,
right.
Yeah. So yes, build smaller and build cleverly, design cleverly so that you can have a very livable house in a much smaller size of house. What else?
Yeah, so after orientation, part and parcel of orientation is once you know where your north is thinking about which rooms you're going to be occupying the most frequently to make the most of that orientation of getting the sun in. So basically orientation means getting as much sun into the living areas as you possibly can. So that's putting kitchen, living, family rooms on that side of the house that gets the sun, and utility rooms like bathrooms, water closets on the side the south side or corners if you can. Garages don't need to be warmed by the sun, so if you can, try and get those at the back of the house. Bedrooms also easily occupied only at night, so it's not so critical. So once you've got the lay of the land, is kind of just trying to fit the space that you've got with the rooms that you want to have, sort of like positioning them in the sort of floor plan area to maximise that passive heating. And then also thinking, actually another thing which I'm thinking about, it's just popped into my mind, is also thinking about zoning. So once you've got your house built, that you only want to be able to heat the smallest areas possible for the shortest amount of time. So you want to be able to close doors and sort of, we've kind of left behind those days when most of us can heat the whole house. We're really just focusing on heating rooms that we're in for the time that we're in them for. So they sort of go hand in hand about location of rooms. Often with large sort of kitchen, living, dining, open space areas, that's often the primary heated area, and it's often a really large volume. So thinking about whether you can reduce that size, whether you can put a divider in or doors or some sort of flexibility for minimising the heating load for those areas in practicality. It won't necessarily show up on the NatHERS rating, but for practicality down the way and economy of running, the ongoing costs of running the house, they're worth thinking about.
Yeah. And on that, I've got a nice little story in relation to orientation and renters. Of course, renters can't do anything about the orientation of their home, but I've had some experience with some renters. And I encourage you, if you are renting or you've got children that rent, to just get them to pause and think about the orientation of their home. I had an experience with a little house in Canberra that was being rented to a young mum with 2 small children with respiratory issues. They only had one window that faced north, and they had the dining table pushed up against it and the curtains closed all the time. So we helped her to rearrange the furniture, showed her how to open that up and made the kids' play area in that sunny spot in the living area, and also moved the kids out of the corner bedroom, which was the southwest corner, into a central bedroom that only had one external wall, so it was more temperature stable. So there are things you can do in your existing homes too. So it is worth pausing to think about which of the rooms in my house does get some good sunshine in winter. How can I make the most of that, even if it's just drying your clothes on a clothes horse in that room with the curtains open, or moving your desk in there, or making it a nice little reading nook or something or other, or the put the youngest child in there if they're, you know, keep them nice and warm.
And it's a good idea to, I mean, I know that the rental market is ridiculously tight in most places around Australia at the moment. So it's, you know, there's maybe not a whole stack of choice, but if you are looking for a new rental house and you have some choice, then it's definitely worth keeping in mind things like orientation. Figure out which way the living room windows face. Yeah, it's definitely something you can think about, and pick a house that that at least faces the right way.
That's right. And
I
pick an
think
apartment where you can get some cross ventilation.
Definitely oh yes, definitely an apartment. We haven't talked about cross ventilation yet, really.
No.
That's so that maybe let's have a quick chat about the importance of cross ventilation for because that we've talked mostly about keeping houses warm in winter, but you can also do a lot with design to keep houses cool in summer without necessarily needing air conditioning.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my house, because it faced north to the street, I actually had a lot of east and westerly exposure, so more glass than typical for a lighthouse to the east and west. But the great advantage of that with windows with good opening portions was that on those lovely summer evenings when the temperature dropped after it had been 40 degrees, we could open right up so that the house could vent. So we could cross ventilate the house to cool it down. So really, really powerful in summer to be able to open up and vent your home. And you can assist that with ceiling fans and things. But yeah, that's what we mean by cross ventilation. And apartments, particularly new apartments, often really suffer because often they don't have that ability to cross ventilate.
Absolutely no way. Yeah.
Makes a huge difference if you're choosing an apartment, if you can get one that does have windows on opposite sides that open. Yeah,
for sure. When we're talking about ventilation and air tightness though, Jenny, or everybody, I know that there's a bit of a concern starting to crop up that the more we draft proof our homes and make them airtight, the higher the chances of creating condensation problems. And people don't, you know, there's some people who think that it's important not to seal up their home, seal up all the drafts in their homes, because then they're gonna have mold issues. What's the story there?
Well, the first thing is to realise that air leakage and ventilation are different things. So, you know, air leakage is the random stuff. It's not planned for, it's not designed in, it's just random junctions and gaps in your building envelope. So that in itself is going to lead to problems, and often potentially condensation inside the walls and inside the roof space where you can't see it. So there's a lot of confusion. So I should direct people, we'll put a link up to a condensation management article I did for Renew a few years ago, which helps summarise some of this, because I probably won't do it neatly here now. But the important thing is the draft sealing stops that random air leakage. So you can control the ventilation of your home, because the ventilation is designed for and planned in. And it can be the simple things like opening windows on either sides of your home. And if your home is well insulated and draft sealed and well oriented, the temperature is much more stable and warmer, and you will often have your windows open. So they sort of go together anyway. So you're not going to suffocate. A lot of people go, you know, I'm going to suffocate, but you can still open your windows. And in terms of moisture management, you really have to, once we don't live in leaky sieve-like homes, you have to use your exhaust fan in bathrooms and your exhaust fans in the kitchens. And typically older homes have pretty crappy exhaust fans that aren't very powerful, and often they're just sucking the moist air out and dumping it into your roof space. So upgrading the exhaust fans is a relatively simple thing you can do in your wet areas. And when you have a shower, run the exhaust fan and leave it running for 15 to 20 minutes afterwards. So it's about managing the moisture load inside your home. Draft sealing is not going to cause condensation problems. It's completely overblown in my mind. It's been, and by draft sealing, we're not talking about going to passive house levels of air tightness. So people may be a bit confused. People may have heard of passive house. It's a German solar construction. They're often, it's not passive solar. It's a different thing. They can happen together. But passive house is very focused on very extreme levels of air tightness. It's not what my business does. We don't introduce new internal air barriers and membranes and things. It's just about sealing up that gyprock layer. So that's the type of draft sealing I'm talking about. Pretty basic stuff. can make a huge difference.
And then you open your windows when you want fresh air, and
Yep.
yeah. Or there's also the possibility of including, as I know you've done in at least one project, Jenny, the decentralized mechanical ventilation systems, which can be very small and compact and very effective.
Absolutely.
For, introducing fresh air and helping to manage the humidity as well, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And so because air tightness
without losing the thermal energy.
Yeah, that's right. So the mechanical heat recovery ventilation can be really useful for people who've got health problems or severe allergies or live near noisy roads or polluted environments. You know, there's certainly very good reasons to go for a higher level of air tightness and mechanical ventilation in some cases, but generally speaking, there's a much more effective level of air tightness we can aim for.
So when I'm going to jump to some questions from our viewers. There's lots coming in. Thank you everyone for sending your questions through. There's so many great ones. One relating to ventilation and breezes. Rhiannon wants to know she says when you do have natural cooling breezes from directions that coincide well with the orientation with good orientation for sunlight as well, then great, right? But if you don't always get cooling breezes, from those optimum directions, what are some techniques or building approaches you can use to create cooling in warmer seasons?
So I suppose thinking about heat rising is a good point, that as that heat rises, you want to be purging it from up high. So having some windows up high that you can open to ventilate, and something that ideally, it doesn't have to be all the way open. If it's open enough to ventilate and create cross flow, then that's going to give you a reasonably good benefit.
And one of the really simple things, is turning on those exhaust fans. I say in summer, you turn on your kitchen exhaust and your bathroom exhaust and open some windows, and that will help create the pressure difference to actually draw in the cooling air. And also grab a pedestal fan and point it out a window. It actually creates the pressure difference that will draw air from the other side of the house through an open window. So there are some ways you can help create that cross flow as well. But yeah, the purging up high, if you're lucky enough to have some higher windows, that can work really well. Yeah,
absolutely.
And if the intention is just for cooling, the ceiling fan itself, of course, will create air movement. But the other thing is, a lot of people don't realise that their heat pump, if they've got a reverse cycle heat pump, which we call, I think Tasmanians call it.
You call it a heat pump. We call them air conditioners.
Okay. So most air conditioners do have a fan mode only, which you can, which is not air conditioning, and it's not heating, but it's just moving air, and it's very, very cost effective. It basically uses no energy. It uses minimal energy to run, and it's something that's sitting on the wall anyway, and doesn't tend to get, well, in Tasmania, people don't tend to know about using it just as a air movement device.
Yeah.
Whereas the people on the mainland don't know about using it as a heating device.
True.
So everyone
fancy that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love the idea of thinking about cross flow ventilation and drawing that air across a green space outside to try and add some moisture and reduce the temperature and bring that through into the house.
I was just going to say that exact same thing, Ian. Either sort of cooling the air that you're dragging through your house with greenery, or with even a water feature just outside, a pond or whatever it is, can be really effective.
So that's the other great thing. If your house footprint is smaller, you've got more space for your garden. And if you're serious about sustainability, your landscape should work with the house. It really can make your sustainable home sing if you use the landscape in combination with your house design. So my previous house, my north-facing deck, my west-facing deck, covered in deciduous vines over summer. It was beautiful, beautiful, cool, transpirational cooling over winter. Drops all those leaves, prune it back hard, the sun flooded in. So use your garden to enhance your home.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it together. That's another thing that often gets chopped out of scope, building scope. If the budget gets a bit out of hand, is landscaping, and it's
it can be. That's the other thing. A lot of people don't realise that it can be modelled in the NATO's modelling. Rebecca, you probably come across this, that we can model those deciduous vines and the impact over viola and deciduous trees as well.
Actually, that's a really important point. I meant to make that point earlier, that although there's when we do star ratings for building compliance, we have to follow, there's a whole lot of set rules which we have to follow. That's just for compliance. The tools are so much more powerful than that to be to manipulate a more realistic scenarios to how you might live in a house, and putting in shading directly outside the allowed rules can be done and should be done to get a much more realistic result from the modelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really encourage doing that. And yeah, we do tend to do that, a lot of that in our own business, especially when it's also a very useful tool for sizing any heating or air conditioning appliance that you have. Oh, sorry, I did have another thought, but it just went about cooling. Oh, that's right. I was also going to say, so not to venture into the window seminar, thinking about the style of opening of windows. Some windows are better at capturing airflow and directing it into the house, particularly casement windows, which sort of fold outwards. They're out there capturing any air that's moving through and can be used to funnel that air in.
Bree would like to know how things like draft sealing translate to subtropical climates like Brisbane. Is it as important in that kind of a climate to get stuck into your draft sealing?
Look, not as important as in a heating dominated climate like Canberra's or Tasmania's or parts of Victoria.
Yeah.
But it depends. If you're going for, some climates, it makes sense to have, because you're never getting particularly cold over winter. So winter's not a driving issue. It depends on the nature of the construction. The old Queenslander style construction, and I've got dear friends at People-Oriented Design Pod in Cairns who do magnificent designs suited to the climate. So if you're designing properly,
absolutely,
they're having outside rooms and really relying on that cross ventilation, then no. But if you're going to take a conventional style of construction and put it into that climate, which is happening more and more, then air leakage is no good to anyone. You're still going to be reliant on reverse cycle air conditioning for your heating, cooling in that climate, and air leakage is not going to help. So
I think that's the key difference, isn't it? Are you designing a house to be air conditioned most of the time, or are you designing it so that you don't need to do that in a tropical or subtropical climate? And there's two different ways of thinking about that.
It's still uncontrolled air leakage, and it's also still easy to fix, or pretty cost effective to manage.
Absolutely. And even if you want to avoid air conditioning use as much as possible in that climate, and therefore have very good ventilation and cross ventilation and lots of windows that open and so forth, then it's still better to be able to control that.
And an interesting new strategy in those sorts of climates is to design in that lovely sort of more open way, but to have a room during extreme temperatures, to have that room that is super insulated and nice and airtight that you can all retreat to, during
has an air conditioner.
Has the aircon. So again, get a good designer and the local knowledge. So I always say to people, it's not just grab an architect from any part of the country or grab an energy assessor from any part of the country. I really encourage you to get local expertise, because the builder knows about local construction methods and issues and things, and the energy assessor also has all sorts of interesting local knowledge that will help you. So find the local expertise.
Rocky wants to know, what about the thermal mass that doesn't receive direct sunlight? Is it still useful in absorbing ambient heat from the air?
Yeah, in summer, yes.
And
as long as it's in a room that gets sun, there's not much point having thermal mass outside a room that doesn't get solar heat gain. So
from a NatHERS perspective, or from a just buildings perspective, because I would think that any thermal mass is still going to assist, provided it's well inside the building envelope, and it's still going to contribute to regulating the heating and cooling of the house.
Depends on the climate zone. Depends on whether that slab is insulated.
I was going to say, now we're going to get into this insulation slab.
But it is something that we can test in the modelling. You can put it in and you can take it out, and you are not going to get any more authoritative result or understanding than what the modelling tells you, because it's modelling heat transfer between different temperature zones. So this is where it's really important to use a thermal assessor and get them to work, get them to trial different scenarios.
It's probably fair to say that thermal mass that doesn't have direct sunlight falling on it is not going to be as effective as thermal mass that does have direct sunlight, but it's not going to, it's also probably, if it's within the insulated thermal envelope, it's not going to be bad. You know, it's not going
No, but again, it costs you money. So again, that's that balance, isn't it? So
and it's got if it's concrete, then it's got pretty high embodied carbon and so forth. So it's, I think my personal view is, if you're going to include thermal mass, make it very well designed and very targeted.
And again,
it is important to remember that, you know, buildings are very complex. They are really, really complex, and having too much thermal mass is counterproductive as well. So it's it's really a case-by-case scenario, and there are a lot of factors that go into it to determine
too much thermal mass and you can feel pretty cold over winter, and if your house gets really, really, really hot over an extended heat wave period, so you can go too far.
It can take a long time for houses with lots of thermal mass to cool down after a heat wave, kind of.
And it also takes a long time in a cold climate. You know, in Tasmania we have a lot of sandstone buildings. People are using converting them into residences, and so there's no insulation. There's a huge amount of thermal mass, and if a sandstone wall is poorly insulated, so you know, I can't remember off the top of my head, but done calculations about how much of the energy that your heater generates goes into just warming up those sandstone blocks to get it to some sort of equilibrium. Which is
Karen's just made the point in the chat that in summer you don't want your thermal mass to receive direct
sunlight. Definitely not.
Absolutely don't. No, that's why you design your shading to
shade.
Keep the sun off it at all costs in summer.
Totally.
What are some ways to, Narelle would like to know, what are some ways to deal with heat and humidity in subtropical climates when, or humidity particularly, I guess, when a ceiling fan doesn't feel like it's making a difference?
Reverse cycle air conditioner.
And,
you know, and they're not evil. I want to spell this out. We haven't really talked overtly about going all electric. I think everyone out there should assume we're all about going all electric. I have an acronym.
I don't think let's not assume. Let's go there. Let's put it out there.
Get off gas. So my favorite acronym is DIG. Dig it, draft seal, insulate, and get off gas. So all electric homes can be super, super efficient, and reverse cycle air conditioners are not evil things. It's just that we've plonked them on houses that are really badly designed and oversized. If you do all of the things we've been talking about, your reverse cycle air conditioner hardly needs to run, and they're super efficient. You know, that 1 unit of energy in can get you 4, 5, sometimes more units of energy out. So they are really, really efficient for heating and for cooling, and they can do both. So the one thing, 1 unit on the wall can do amazing things.
And if you've got solar, then also you're not using very much energy to run them, and you're generating it yourself anyway. So,
but ideally you are just using them on those worst days. If you can use passive cooling, that's ideal. And another thing, just remember they do dehumidify. They can work in dehumidifying mode as well, so they can take out quite a lot of moisture from a room over time. So just check that whether your model has that feature. Dehumidify.
Yes, humidity is a tricky one to manage in very humid climates, and you know, the old school evaporative air conditioners absolutely do not work in humid climates.
So. You really need air movement and shade.
And garden microclimates outside.
Use your landscaping.
All those things we've talked about.
And acclimatise.
That's it.
Speaking of climate zones, we had one question which I've just lost. Oh yeah, Crystal Lee would like to know: is there a map of different climate zones in Australia somewhere? Yes,
it's probably easiest. So when we talk about climate zones, there's two sets of climate zones. One is the building, the building code board's climate zone, which breaks Australia up into 7 sort of broad regional, And we can put a link up to
Ian's
that.
just done
That
that.
is-
Yep.
Okay, and
Thank you, Ian.
alternatively, the 69 climate zones, which I talked about
I'll put the other
before,
one up.
is to do just specifically with NatHERS ratings, and there are certainly maps of those as well, and you can search by postcode, and if you can't find a link, we can
Well, that one that Ian has sent the link into put the link in the
Right.
chat. That's a really
That's the
interesting one.
basic one.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
basic
sorry,
one.
I keep
There's
doing
8
the other
climate
one.
zones in
There's the other
across
one.
Australia. Yeah.
I'm not sending it to everyone.
NatHERS.
Sorry.
Yeah, and you should actually be able to get the actual climate files for your climate zone, which gives you sort of temperature, humidity, wind, and get a bit more granular detail about various aspects of your climate if you can find your NatHERS climate zone.
Talk amongst yourselves for a minute
And
while I choose the next
while we're talking
question.
about it, just a lot of this is about new designs and sort of getting back towards concept of renovations and existing homes, and people are just like trying to improve the efficiency of their home. We've sort of referred to draft ceiling as being a really important thing to do because it's the cheapest, most cost-effective thing that you can do, which will give you the best results. But it's often hard to track down where air is leaking, where you're losing your heated air or your cooled air. And so maybe we should have a bit of a brainstorm of some of the places that you should look in your home to
and how to find them too. Thermal imaging cameras.
Yes.
No, Anna, you don't find it much with the thermal camera.
No, that's true. You don't find air
Yeah,
leaks. You find insulation problems.
I'm seeing a lot of chat on various forums about people thinking thermal cameras are going to do wonderful things for them. Everyone be a bit cautious about thermal cameras. Anyway, there's a backstory to that. But air leaks, well, I think we can actually just talk through the main ones, but also the strategies to find. But when I talked about insulation before, I said start high, work your way down. Same with air leaks. So look in your ceiling. So the classic in older homes are halogen downlights or old vented downlights. So they are great big holes in your ceiling. And not only are they holes, they contain a hot light, which is creating its own, it's actually drawing air out of your house. With the heat rising from that light is actually creating a pressure difference that's sucking air out of your home. I used to go to lots of houses in Canberra that had ducted gas heating coming out of a duct in the ceiling, and then there'd be evaporative cooling duct next door, and then a halogen downlight. So the heat would be coming out of the gas heating, going up through the halogen downlight and up through the evaporative cooling duct. So the first thing is start removing those holes in your ceiling. You don't need ducted systems. I really encourage people to move toward upgrading their insulation and draft ceiling so they don't need as much heating, and split systems will do the job, and getting rid of halogen downlights.
And in older houses too, they
fittings
often have there are often still those vents high up in the walls.
Yes,
from back when there were wood burning fires and
gas fires,
unflued gas heaters and so forth. So you can close them up.
Totally, close those up. So you don't close the holes on the outside of your building because they're doing other things. You need to vent the wall cavity, but close up internally. We're talking about gap sealing the internal lining of your home. So look at your ceiling. Go home, look at your ceiling, and then all the key junctions where your wall meets your ceiling. Sometimes older houses have got cornice that's coming away or full. Just have a peek. Go up and have a look. See if there's a crack at your cornice. But the classic is at the junction of the wall and the floor. So a skirting board can cover things up, but there's often a big gap behind. And the other one I want people to do is go up to your window architrave, feel along the edge of your window architrave at the bottom and the top and down the sides. Often the sides are quite well sealed because the painters will do that. But underneath and above, you can often stick your fingers right in, and they're a direct air leak through to the wall cavity and outside. Caulking gun can fix that really, really easily. It's a big winner.
And what about rent? I mean, it feels like some of this stuff is things that renters could do as well. Yeah,
look, renters, yes, you can do some of those things. Like you'll find, certainly in Canberra rentals, we'll find huge gaps around windows, and they are a really easy win that your landlord's not even going to know about, and you will appreciate the difference. closing off wet areas, you know, those areas that do have exhaust fans that connect through the roof space, you know, zone off. Rebecca mentioned zoning before. It's a really, really clever strategy in a rental to zone off and only heat the areas you're in. Buy yourself a heated throw rug instead of turning on the heating is another big win for renters. But door snakes, you know, you come back to the really basic things, but if you can see a big air leak, then do what you can to clog it up. I used to, in my rentals, I've sticky taped across things. I've, you know, used blue tack to plug gaps, you know, whatever you need to do, I say.
Yeah. A couple of others are your plumbing penetrations under kitchen sinks and laundries, baths. They're often not well sealed, and just you poking something in there, even if it's just a cloth or something to build.
Absolutely.
And pet doors are often very, very drafty, and you'll get, especially if you don't have a pet, they can be really problematic.
Ian, you must be across all of these approaches from the point of view of not letting them happen in the first place when you're building your clients' homes. What are some of the sort of things that you get your team to focus on, particularly on doing well to avoid problems down the track?
Yes, I mean, we manage a lot of our exterior wrap, like it's the most important part of the house because it's going to get covered up, and that it doesn't just air seal, but it's going to keep vermin and other things out of the house as well. And we're really focused on using the I'm going to give them a shout out, but the Epic Pro Climber wraps, because they are just bomb proof. They're so tear resistant, and the vapor permeability of them is fantastic. We love them. It's just a real nice blanket to wrap around the house and feel good about. And we all it's the most exciting part of the job for us, to wrap that house up nice and tight and tape it all off. And it looks incredible. And then we cover it up with cladding, and it looks, you miss out on it. But I think having a well-wrapped house is so crucial, and using the right kind of wraps that are,
What do you mean by vapor permeable?
So vapor permeable wraps, wraps that allow moisture vapor to pass through them, but from the outside they won't let water like rain or condensation come back through the films. There's a really cool test you can do with the Pro Climber ones. You basically just make a bucket and fill them up with water and put them in a cup overnight, and no water goes through them. Most other wraps wouldn't survive that sort of test. And then vice versa, you can put boiling water in a cup, put the wrap over a cup and another cup on top, and you'll see the condensation pulling through that wrap. So we know that it's really vapor permeable, meaning that as that moisture in your house builds up, or in the wall cavity, if you're not well sealed, it can get out of the house and not create condensation issues. So that's the biggest one for sure.
And just to expand on that, building wraps are really important when it comes to managing condensation and moisture contents in a house. And it's been the latest building code is really addressing that and tightening down. So the type of building wrap that you put on a building is very climate dependent now, and should be it's prescribed for what sort of wrap that you will use in a build depending on your climate. So hopefully in cold climates you'll never see shiny reflective foil sarking or building wraps ever again. And if you see that going on a new house, stop the build. Whereas that sort of shiny reflective foil sarking is okay in a hot climate where you want a reflective component. But in a cold climate, the wraps are very sophisticated now. They're more like a cloth, fabric-y sort of wrap, and they're letting they're still waterproof, but they let the moisture travel through by osmosis. So it's quite a high tech area now, and it's really important to get that right in the design stage when you build.
Can I just pop in and add that I love wrapping buildings too, and we've been using vapor permeable wraps since 2010, and I'm so excited it's now in the code. And I love seeing a well taped wrap, but it is important to know that when we're talking about the external wrap, when with the passive house technique, there's an external wrap and also an internal wrap, which is an air barrier membrane. And so while it's important to have that external wrap, I'm all for that. And it contributes to air tightness. It's still really important that internal lining, that gyprock layer, is well sealed. I'm sure Ian, on every one of Ian's jobs, I'm sure they cork that join of the wall and the floor, and they're making sure all those junctions are well sealed, because you still don't want the air to get into. If it does get into the wall cavity, it's going to be managed well, and moisture is going to be managed, but you still don't want your heated air inside the home getting past that gyprock layer into that wall space if you can stop it. So the plasterboard lining does, although it's slightly vapor permeable, will stop that from happening. Largely painted plasterboard is a pretty good air tightness barrier.
When there's attention paid to all the gaps, all the joins rather.
Yeah.
Should we go into some real basics of how to draft seal? I've seen there's a few questions about that. I mean,
and how to insulate too. There's quite a few questions coming through about
wall insulation predominantly.
Wall insulation,
I mean, I'm just going to go back to what Jenny said earlier about heat rising, and that the most important place to put your insulation's on top. Yeah, walls are notoriously difficult without pulling off linings, but
you can. There are ways to retrofit, and in the ACT in Victoria, we do it all the time. So So you'd need to get an insulation specialist. So I don't physically do it. I work with local insulators. If you're in Victoria, oh my God, it escapes me, but there's one of the outfits is an expert in retrofitting wall insulation. But there are good options that you can pump in. So that's what we do. So you can pump into the cavity.
So there is a question there about whether you can do it without having a wall sarking, and
you can.
Generally, if the condition of the wall is good, the products that they use to blow in are waterproof, have been treated so they don't absorb water, and generally the structure is good that they can be pumped in.
Yeah,
it's like a loose fill rock wool kind of product that sort of flows in, and once it's in, it kind of sets and it fills in the cavity quite nicely. So I think retrofitting insulation's come a long way in the last 5 or 10 years, and it's not as cost prohibitive as you might think.
No, there's a lot more.
If there's a company around who can do it, you do need to have specialists. To do it. Same
comes in, for your ceiling. I feel like I always need to say to people, your roof space is a dangerous place. You really want qualified builder or a tradie or an insulation specialist to climb around in your roof. Be careful when you go into your roof space. So you can install your own insulation, but you need to do it very carefully. So I would recommend getting a specialist involved to do that.
So back to the real basics, it's like you're going to put foam around your doors and check your window seals, and you're going to do drop-down seals on the bottom of your external doors to stop those drafts coming through. If you've got cracks in your floorboards, you're going to be there caulking up the cracks in your floorboards. External penetrations of power points or things like that, need to be checking on that sort of gear. We often get asked a lot about underfloor insulation, and there's lots of options out there and lots of different ways to do it, and important to consider moisture movement when you're thinking about the different options. We've seen a few people use spray foam insulation under floors, and I just wanted to talk to the recyclability of that, because once you spray foam all over timber, that timber can never really be used properly in the future, so you're really locking it out. But we also see a lot of people using foam and things like foam boards under floors, and I always worry about moisture movement through there. You've got the choice of trapping. You've got the option that you might be trapping moisture between that foam layer and your subfloor. And at the end of it, I'm always thinking about rodents getting in there and making a mess and creating a nice little warm pocket for them. Talking to Jeremy Spencer, the option we came up with for a couple of jobs was just to roll out R2.5 insulation bats on big
polyester.
rolls.
Do you use polyester? Yeah, because the vermin don't like the polyester as much, which is really strange because it's much friendlier to deal with than
Yeah. And
fiberglass.
you can get products that are quite a high percentage recycled
Yeah,
polyester
Yeah,
too, which is
relatively
really great.
easy to install.
yeah, that's what we do on all our retrofits here in
Yeah.
Canberra is roll out R2 polyester. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jenny, I wanted to talk to you about retrofits and renovations because I know that that's the majority of your work these days at Lighthouse. Can you talk a bit about why that's the case, and are the considerations for good sustainable design different when it's a reno?
So starting with the number one, why are more people doing it? I think because
Why are you doing more of it?
yeah, we're doing more of it because the industry for a long time has told people it can't be done. And I think Lighthouse has shown again and again and it can. And so that's catching on. So people now realise that their home, and I assure you, everyone out there who thinks their home is diabolical, it does have more potential than you realise.
Yeah.
So you can, and why you should think about it is because it will be cheaper. Basic retrofit can actually be incredibly cost effective. Draft ceiling and insulation, they're not at all sexy. You can't show them to your friends, but they're incredibly cost effective, thermally effective, comfort and health effective. So try those things. But the other big reason to renovate and work with what you've got is because of embodied energy and cost of construction. It is so costly to you personally to build, but it's so costly to our environment. Really, do we need, think about what you really need, and it's usually about using the space you've got better. So great design can really do that for you. So yeah, that's why 70, 80, in fact, it was 85% of our work last year was renovation, which is a big swing around from new build, which is where we really started. And we're really excited about that.
How about you, Ian? What's your how does your the proportion of new builds to renovations stack up for you in your work?
Almost all of our stuff recently has been renovation work. Yeah, I guess that's also just because that's the pathway for most builders, is that they do renovations and then progress through to new builds. But yeah, incredibly difficult to get a renovation done really well, I think. And we've kind of worked out that we're quite good at them now because we're good at problem solving and good at talking through all this sort of stuff and options for underfloor insulation and what window is going to work in the right place for a renovation. Yeah, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the tests for a builder, to work out whether a builder is a good builder. Ask them if they like doing renovations. If they like doing renovations, they are, as Ian just hinted, really good problem solvers. They're skilled tradespeople who love solving a problem. Renovation experts are top-notch builders.
Yes, and it's always a lot. It's always easier to start to create something if you're starting with a blank slate.
Yeah.
So Astrid would like to know, if thermal cameras aren't great at finding air leaks, what is the best way to actually identify them, detect them?
The reason people probably think of thermal cameras is because people like me use a thermal camera in combination with a blower door. So a blower door is the tool that we use to depressurize a house, draw air out of a house so air flows in through gaps and cracks. So some of you will have access to somebody with a blower door, so you can hire someone to do that. But I'm also here to, and my business does that, but I'm also here to tell you don't have to do that. There are other ways you can check. And physically looking, honestly, you can actually see and feel most of the big culprits. So start with your eyes and your fingers and your toes on a windy day. And also an incense stick is a great way. And if you've got some cobwebs in your hat, then I'm not afraid to admit I do. In my new apartment, I've noticed where the cobwebs are blowing around. They can be quite a clue. But if you want to go the whole hog and you want to really know where everything is, then someone can come in with a blower door, which helps quantify the leakage rate of your home. It doesn't necessarily locate all the leaks. That's a sort of a separate thing. You've got to then go and look for them while the blower door is blowing. But try fingers, toes, eyes, and an incense stick first. Is my hot tip.
So we're getting to the end of our time, amazingly, already. I wanted to ask you the $1 million question. which often gets asked when it comes to sustainable design, sustainable homes. Does it cost more to do all these things right and to achieve a really great sustainable home that is going to be high performing and keep you comfortable?
Short term, yeah, of course it's going to cost more. You're building a much better product. Long term, I would think not. An architect recently was talking about, everyone looks at like cost per square meter now. Why not look at cost per square meter per years that the house is, a great house. That's
Absolutely.
my 2 cents there.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And they don't even have to cost that much more. I mean, the difference is you're investing in some expert advice. You're investing in some design advice and advice from an energy assessor and potentially advice from a builder, and you're going to have to pay for that. But we shouldn't be shy about that. It's your biggest investment. It's where you and your family are going to live. It has a huge impact on your health and your comfort and your finances. So a little bit of investment up front, really the payback on that is very, very quick. And if you work with an architect who helps you do something that's more compact, then the payoff can be even faster. The other thing I think we need to throw in the mix is that so few people are doing this well that when compact, clever designs sell, we're certainly finding with lighthouses, only 5 or 6 of them have ever hit the market, but the 3 that most recently hit the market have sold for 60% above median house sale price for the suburb, and that surrounding houses have all been much, much bigger homes on much bigger blocks. So they're selling for a premium price because people value good design.
See what's good about them.
And they walk in and feel that comfort, because sadly most of us don't get to experience well-designed homes. So this is why Sustainable House Day is so important. If you can get out and visit homes and actually physically experience what it's like to be in a comfortable home, because most Australians live in pretty diabolical housing. So we don't know how good it can be. So it's so worth it.
And there are so many things that we've talked about today that actually don't cost any more than to get right than to get wrong. Like orientation is one example. Rebecca, you look like you're about to launch into a comment there.
I've got so many thoughts going there.
There's
one that I really want to say, I'm going to leave that to it. Don't let me forget it though. But I just wanted to follow up with Jenny's point. Like, there are so many costs during the design stage. The architect has to consult with so many experts, whether it's fire or livability
architect or building designer.
But I just cannot emphasize enough how important, once the house is built, you can't go back and undo it. So if you can find that extra $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it is, to actually sit down and consult and pay somebody who is passionate about getting it right, it's such a good investment. But I appreciate it's at a very expensive time. But really, my main point is that, is it cost effective? Just think of the climate today. Your house is going to be here for 50 years or 100 years. The climate projection files for CSIRO have developed climate files up to 2090, which we can run on our thermal performance models now. The houses are going to perform, if they're not built well now, they're going to be appalling in 20, 30, 50 years when it's so much hotter, and the pressure on the poor housing quality is going to really suffer. So get it right now to invest in the future. These housing stock that's going to go through for another 50 or 100 years. It's just something that we don't think about, is what's happening to the climate, which is why we're all doing this anyway, is trying to make sustainable houses. But that pressure on our houses is just going to be unbelievable in the coming decades with the changing climate. So it's not cost effective, it's morally effective or ethically effective to get houses built to a high standard today. It's my two.
Thank you, Rebecca. Absolutely. That's a really important point to make. And I think we often just assume that's taken as read, and it shouldn't be, because that is why we're all here at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yes, it's a huge investment into the future.
So my next question was to ask you all for your number one takeaway. Maybe that was already yours, Rebecca.
Yeah, let's say that's mine.
What's your number one takeaway hot tip for attendees tonight, Ian? What do you want them to, stick at the top of their notes that they're taking? Underline.
I'm just going to sound like a builder here, but anyway, let's go. Just how crucial it is to get everyone together at the start. There's so much pushback to involve a builder early in some cases, not all cases, but with the concern that the builder is going to come out of it rubbing his hands together going, I've got these clients and I'm going to, it doesn't matter what price I put on it, they're locked in now. Find the right builder and you won't have that problem. Amelia Lee talks about this all the time. I've listened to a lot of her stuff and really value her opinion.
She's the undercover architect.
Correct. Yeah. But finding the right builder can do so much to save you money and time and effort and headaches and heartaches. And taking that project to tender doesn't give you 3 apple by apple comparisons at all. I'm not great at articulating this stuff, but Amelia is, and some of her podcasts have just like left me going, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Yeah. So that's my takeaway tonight.
Yep.
Thanks, Ian. What about you, Jenny?
I'm going to hold it up. Oh, can you see? If I focus. So less.
Yeah.
But, and also the acronym DIG, draft seal, insulate, get off gas. We didn't talk about that enough. Get off gas.
Very good. Well, listen, that's all we've got time for tonight. In fact, we're a little bit over time. Thank you so much to the 3 of you, Jenny, Ian and Rebecca, for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure. The time has flown by, as it always does. Thanks again to all our sponsors who make these sessions possible. And we hope that everyone listening in tonight can join us for our next session, which is Tuesday next week. We're going to be talking about foundations to finishes, choosing the appropriate building materials. So you'll note that tonight I mostly steered away from conversations about specific building materials. So that was because we've got 8 of these sessions. We've got 6 more to come. We're covering many different topics in more detail than we had the chance to tonight. So please do grab yourselves an extension session pass or an individual ticket to the sessions that interest you. Don't forget to join, renew, or subscribe to one of our magazines to support our work and for a wealth more information on sustainable design and living. And follow the link that Kara's just about to put up in the chat to get on board with Renew. That's it. Thanks again for watching and have a very good night, everybody.